Increased tariffs on China will lead to job losses and higher prices for shoppers. Now, in a joint letter, the brands, which include obviously some really big names here, Walmart, Target, and Gap, say, quote, an escalated trade war is not in the country's best interests, and both sides will lose. We are counting on you, they mean the president, to force a positive resolution. Now, public hearings on the proposed tariffs will begin Monday, and all of this comes as China is aiming to try and drum up trade outside of the United States. President Xi has just met the Russian and Indian leaders at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. That's a key forum for Central Asian economic and security issues. Robert Lawrence Okun is a longtime advisor to Chinese leaders and the author of How China's Leaders Think. And we have you here again to get some insight. You have just returned from China. When we take a step here and look at the escalation in the trade war recently, what do you think is at stake now? And what do you think will get China to move to a place of compromise?
The double irony here is that everything the U.S. asked for is in China's best interest. Intellectual property rights protection, opening up of markets, reduction of subsidies to state-owned enterprises, et cetera. Second irony is that the U.S. and China trade negotiators have pretty much reached agreement on most of the substance. On the intellectual property rights, China passed a law that now reduces the requirement of forced technology transfer and joint ventures. The problem has been on the enforcement and the public perception of what it means, what the U.S. is insisting and what China wants to do privately. So we have this double frustration because tariffs are terrible for everyone. It reduces the economic efficiency. And by President Trump recently saying he's going to put 25% tariffs on $300 billion more if Xi Jinping doesn't show up, really puts China in a very awkward place. A lesser leader than President Xi would have had to reject that just because he would lose so much in his own perception. Fortunately, President Xi is strong enough that hopefully he will be able to overcome that and meet with President Trump.
And I know this is incredibly complicated. As all of this has been going on, Robert, as you know, we had those protests in Hong Kong. Now, Beijing has been in the center of that story this week. Those protests, as we were saying, China has summoned the U.S. envoy over, quote, its, quote, irresponsible remarks made about that controversial extradition bill, with Beijing saying it will not accept, and it says the United States is meddling in Hong Kong affairs. Listen, you just said that it takes someone of the strength of Xi to kind of get through this. And yet when you look at the Hong Kong protests and you look at so many people, including Secretary of State Pompeo, that said quite concretely, we stand on the side of democracy.
Sure.
How does this all get resolved when you've got so much at stake?
Let's understand why Hong Kong is so important to Beijing. First of all, economically, it has been the window to the world, but that has changed with the growth of Shanghai and Shenzhen and other areas. But now Hong Kong is the linchpin of what's called the Greater Bay Strategy, which is an integration of Hong Kong and Macau with the major cities in Guangdong province. Together, they have about 12% of the Chinese GDP, about $1.5 trillion. If that were a country alone, it would be in the top 15 in the world. So it's the center of China's economic, and the idea of regional coordination. They're doing it in the Yangtze River around Shanghai and north with Beijing, Tianjin, and the new city of Chang'an. So there are three areas, but this is the big one around the Bay Area, the Greater Bay Area. So Hong Kong is critical to make that happen in many different ways: technology, logistics, etc. There are two other reasons. One is that this is a demonstration of the Chinese method of governance. And third, it's an expression of national pride. So that puts that at the highest level of significance, especially this time in the 70th anniversary year of the People's Republic. So those are the stakes.
And let's be clear, Robert, they believe that system of governance is superior.
No question. And the great majority of the people think the same. That doesn't mean it's perfect, and there's a lot of people complain about not access to the internet and different things. But bottom line, people's lives are better.
Okay,
800 million people have been lifted out of poverty. People see that.
Okay, we're not talking about perfect, though. We're talking about repressive, which is a completely different issue. But we had an interesting issue come up. The global chief economist of UBS has been put on leave over a phrase, and it was insensitive, and a phrase used, and he said that. He apologized. He was discussing consumer prices in China, and Paul Donovan had attributed higher prices to, quote, sick pigs, which was interpreted by some as a slur. Now, he, as I said, apologized. Take a listen.
I apologise for anyone who took any offence from my remarks, which were clearly not intended to offend. I got it wrong. I made a mistake, and I unwittingly used hugely culturally insensitive language.
And yet, this is even from the groups of financiers and securities people in Hong Kong. They're saying, we don't want any part of UBS anymore. They are taking a stand, and yet not taking a stand on what's going on in Hong Kong with the extradition treaty. Can you explain that to me?
You know, this goes well beyond China culture. This is a human tendency. We all have a sense. It's based on an evolutionary process of in-group and out-group. And we're always more willing to accept physical abnormalities or problems in order to elevate our pride. That is just the case. And this is perceived as an attack on Chinese pride. We see that everywhere in all human societies. And so that is the most sensitive thing. That gets people's emotions the highest. And that's what they're reacting to. They're reacting to the simple cultural in and out group situation. I wouldn't read more into it than that.
Having said that, I gotta go, but quickly, you just returned from China. Are you hopeful about the tariff talks or not?
You know, I look for hope in strange things. China published an aggressive an attack against the U.S. after the U.S. attacked China for backtracking, and China went after it. I looked upon that positively, because now China is setting an equal thing. It's not that the U.S. has been attacking them, and now the attack is equal. So they are in equal position. They had a phrase in that document which was important. They basically said that China has said publicly and strongly that it will abide by anything that they agreed to, right, including intellectual property protection, and therefore the kind of restrictions that the U.S. was wanting to do in terms of laws would be exceedingly an offense to their dignity. And so if the U.S. would trust China, it's a bad word, I know, but you could always go back, but China